I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to class. Appreciate you being here. I assume Les will be gallivanting through here in a minute. But we do appreciate each one of you. Hope everybody's got your clocks sorted out and everything from last night. They had I think they had the vote to eliminate the time changes, but then they never had the final vote to do that, and so therefore we keep changing the clocks until they get that sorted out eventually. But a beautiful day outside, and again, we're just grateful for each one of you to be here. We're going to continue in Genesis. We're going to finish up chapter 10 and start on chapter 11. Let me see. Is this one for Dr. Cloud? Can he use that one? RF9. Is that good? Just in case. Yep. Any questions that come up? And I may start to say something like, well, that's just a ridiculous question. That's so easy. I'm going to let Dr. Cloud answer that one. So just be prepared for that as well. But as I say, Genesis, we're in chapter 10 and 11, or in chapter 10, and then we're going to continue into chapter 11 here momentarily. And we started looking at Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and started looking at some of the genealogy of them and of their kind of who was with who, and then we started looking at some of the maps as well to see where the different ones were living for a period of time. But Genesis 10 lists the patriarchal founders of 70 nations, including the line that would eventually produce the nation of Israel. And of course, that's where the focus obviously takes on. Once we finish up with Genesis 11 and we get the introduction of Abraham, or Abram, later to become Abraham, we begin to see, again, more and more of God's plan, of His purpose, of how He brings things together. Sometimes in spite of our own misgivings or our own challenges, and sometimes, as we'll see later on in Genesis, sometimes we see situations where folks try to help God out, thinking that maybe He needs our help to bring about His plan and His purpose, when in fact, of course, He doesn't need that at all. But human nature being as it is, sometimes that's what takes place. Oh, there you are. Okay. Did you not fix your coffee?
She did.
Didn't fix your coffee.
She didn't.
Joan fixed mine again, just to let you know. So, here we are.
Yes.
But just talking about, just introducing this slide as far as, again, the whole purpose of where this is going is eventually introducing God's plan through Israel, and again, the whole encompassing of that plan and seeing how it all comes about because of His plan, in spite of sometimes our own attempts at trying to help Him along the way. He has His plan and of how He wants to do things.
Yeah, and let me say another thing about the list. You'll notice 70 nations up there. 70 is a symbolic number. 7, as you know, is symbolic in the Bible. These are nations that are going to affect Israel. He's not trying to give a comprehensive listing of all the world, okay? Obviously, we don't have, Asia represented, and I'm talking about the eastern part of Asia. We don't have the Americas represented in the list. This is a list that is about Israel, and these nations are the nations that surround her. That's why they're up here. And by the way, you will see in the list, as we will in chapter 11 as well, a great emphasis on Babylon, the Fertile Crescent, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. You're going to see the cities that were founded that become the enemies of Israel. And so you have the Canaanites, you have the Assyrians, you have the Babylonians. You get all of these that are going to be struggles for Israel through the rest of the story of Israel.
Yeah, and fascinating with the fact that they all came from the one family. I mean, essentially came from the one family, and yet they end up, being, brutal, bitter enemies, with one another.
Yeah.
I'll hand this back over to you.
I'll let you read them.
All right. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras.
Yeah, and of course, we read these names and they don't resonate with us. And yet Israel would have read them. Magog is going to appear, by the way, back even in the book of Revelation, coming up in the northern part of Turkey, even into southern Russia today. And so you get Japheth's line, and if you'll notice, I think last week y'all touched on Ham's line. You'll see that Japheth is there to the north. Notice, Japheth to the north, Shem to the east, Ham to the south and southwest. Again, all surrounding Canaan. So realize this is theological. This is not meant to say, here's all the nations of the earth, here's where they were scattered. No, here's the nations that surrounded Israel. And that's the reason. And you see Israel right there in the middle. They're in the little rectangle there. And notice there, it's called Canaan. One of the things I want to emphasize is the story of the cursing of Canaan. And I watched a good bit of y'all's lesson. Did y'all discuss how it's been misused last week?
We did some, but
okay,
go ahead.
Okay. The cursing of Canaan by Noah is more about the story of Canaan. That's the whole point of it. It's not about alcoholism. I read a book written by a professor at one of our sister colleges, and it was on the book of Genesis. It came to the story of Noah cursing Canaan, and the whole chapter was about alcohol abuse. Okay? That's not about alcohol abuse. Now, is alcohol abuse there? Yes. Did Noah know about it? Y'all discussed that some last week. I heard y'all discuss that. That's not the point of the text. The point of the text is that Canaan, Ham's son, was cursed. Where was Israel going when they came out of Egypt? To Canaan's land. By the way, one of my favorite songs, Rodney, is "To Canaan's Land I'm on my way." It's a terrible song. It's Canaan's land. Canaan wasn't a good person, okay? We kind of make Canaan a good person. I'm going to go ahead and give this mic to...
He's got one.
You got your own. All
Yeah.
right. Ken's being proactive today. Thank you, Ken. Yeah. And so let me just mention that the whole point of that story is to establish where Israel's going, what land she's going to possess, and why she's going to possess it, because of a curse. Now, if you want to debate the curse, you're free to do that. And people do that all the time. I mean, that's one of the big questions in the commentary is why does Noah not curse Ham?
Right.
Why does he curse Canaan? And the point being is because Canaan being cursed sets up Israel's right to go in and take the land. You kind of need to see the theology going there. And let me just say a word, and I know y'all mentioned this. This text was used 150, 200 years ago to justify American slavery. There is no justification for American slavery in this text, period. To argue that the cursing of Canaan justified the slavery of African people is just sheer ungodliness. I mean, if you're going to argue that, you're going to have to argue that the slaves have got to come from the Canaanite tribes, and that's not where they came from. And let me just say that if you go back in some of our writings, this was quoted a lot. I mean, even going back into the 1800s, you'll see people talk about, and of course, it's interestingly, it's not just the curse of Canaan, it's the Hamite curse.
Right.
Ham wasn't cursed. Canaan was cursed. And so trying to get that right is sometimes a challenge. I just wanted to say a word about that.
Yeah.
Rodney, y'all did a great job last week. Thank y'all so much. I did tune in and watch a lot of it. I just didn't get every bit of it. And, all right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think this was maybe some of the ones we looked at last week, and I said that the English equivalent was Joe, Mark, and Sam.
Yes.
So you got the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah, the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, the Kittites, and the Rodanites.
And notice that some of them are tribes. They're not individuals, they're tribes. And so again, these are nations or the patriarchs that started the nations. And of course, y'all mentioned this last week. This is where the Maritime people came from, the Phoenicians, perhaps even those on the various islands of the Mediterranean. And then we go south.
Yeah, I can do these.
Yes.
Sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan.
And you look at that and you go, Egypt was a patriarch? That's the name that's used, even though Egypt is still called Egypt today. So it's interesting, the biblical, way back then, already getting the names of the patriarchs. And so Cush, Egypt, are they countries or are they individuals who the countries were named after? Rodney, any thoughts on that? I mean, was there an Egypt? Are you on? Make sure the green light's on. Right there in the middle of it, so somewhere there, Rodney. Juanita, surely you can help me. Yeah, red light won't work. It's got to go green.
I think it's changing, though.
Push it up. Is it up?
Yeah, try it now.
There you go.
It started red, and then it changed.
There you go.
Yeah, the problem is if you looked at more than one translation, you won't have Egypt in all of them. The word is Mitzrayim, and it means actually probably in Hebrew, that was the Akkadian word and the ancient Near Eastern word, and it means that literally the two lands. The word Egypt actually is a Greek word. Later, they transliterated one of the words for Egypt. There were several words, and it meant the land of the god Tha,
Okay.
Ptha, and that was just transliterated to Greek. So that's how we got our word Egypt, Aiguptos. But it was referring to the area which was actually, the Hebrew word really means probably upper and lower Egypt is what it probably means.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, again, you get into the languages, you see a lot of background in that we as regular English-speaking people have a hard time with. And so the Ham, land of Ham is to the south and to the west of Canaan. And so you see the various tribes that are nations that come out of it all the way down to the south. And so all of these, again, having an impact on the nation of Israel. And the sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka, the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. Again, just nations that Israel would have been very familiar with. And then just a little note.
Yeah.
Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Obviously, some type of tradition that catches there. Rodney, thoughts on Nimrod?
Yeah, Nimrod, many different ancient peoples have discussed who Nimrod was. The mound that Layard dug into, first we think about Layard being Nineveh, but the first place he went was a mound called Nimrud, same as Nimrod, and 300 acres. And when they dug down in there, they found the city of Kala, which we're going to come to, which was the capital of Assyria during many kings, Tiglath-Pileser, and many other kings. It was the capital before Nineveh became the capital. But anyway, as this story develops, when you're going to see Nimrod establishing some cities that we now know an awful lot about.
Sure.
So, but when Layard passed it on the Tigris, he said to the guide, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, that's the god Nimrod." And under that mound, instead of Kala, you'll see the verses coming up, one of the cities that Nimrod built is Kala. And that's the city they found underneath it.
Yeah.
One of the main ancient capitals of Assyria.
Yeah. And this is one of the
Right there.
fascinating things as far as, because sometimes people say, well, what's the big deal about archaeology? I mean, archaeology is huge because it over and over and over reestablishes the confidence in Scripture.
Yeah.
And a lot of time, people, 150 years ago, well, look, the Hittites, well, they never existed. We never found, whatever. Now there's all sorts of archaeological, research and evidence for the Hittite people. And not too long ago, King David, the word David, well, he was never a king. Well, now there's, plenty of evidence to show that he was a king.
My greatest disappointment with Rodney, he was right there near that stela that they dug up and probably walked on top of it and did not discover it, Rodney. Any defense of that?
You'll have to repeat it again.
I said you were so close to the stela that had the name of David on it.
That's right.
Probably walked right over the top of it and didn't know it was there.
Yeah, I walked just a few feet from it. It was under the ground, several inches.
Your X-ray vision should have seen it.
That's right. 8 months later, they found it. I was there in January. They found it in August, and Dan was a city being excavated by my university, Hebrew Union College, were the excavators of Dan.
We're talking about Tel Dan. Rodney excavated there, and a few months after he was there, they discovered a stone carving with the name David on it. And, of course, one of two that mentions the family of David.
Yeah, the first time ever. And then the Moabite stone, we think, is missing one, because they broke it to pieces, one letter. And then K.A. Kitchen down in Egypt found in the records there when Shishak invaded, he said, "I came to the heights of David."
Yeah.
And so it's 3 times the name has appeared in a very short time together.
By the way, if Rodney had discovered that stela, he probably wouldn't be here today. He'd be, out lecturing all over the place about his famous discovery.
Yeah. My understanding of it was when you were there, that probably when you walked on it, you disturbed some stuff which allowed them to find it.
All right. Foolishness, enough foolishness. Notice the cities, the first centers of his kingdom. Nimrod was Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh, in Shinar being there in the modern-day Iraq. We're talking about modern-day Iraq, where the American army was fighting. Now, Babylon was in the southern part of it. That would be the first Gulf War. The second battle we fought was up in the northern part, which was where Assyria was. And so you get all of these cities. From that land, he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Kala. Yeah.
Yeah, the word is Syria. The real word there is Asher. But Greek couldn't write Asher because Greek has no SH. So Greek had to write ASSYR or U. It's really a U. That's a capital U, looks like a Y. That's how it got. And when the Septuagint came along, it decided it wasn't going to use Asher for the god and Asher for the main city and Asher for the country. Because the Akkadian tells you there's a difference. It says the city of, the land of.
Right.
And so Greek said, well, let's just put an IA on the end, just like ecclesia. And so they put an I in, and they did, and they still called the god and the chief city Asher. But anyway, it comes in English because of the Greek translation. That happens a lot. And then you mentioned, so you see the city of Kala there. That was the city under the mound of Nimrod.
There we go.
And it's so interesting that Nimrod, and some of your translations won't say he went to Assyria, said, but that's the best translation right there. He went to Ashur or Assyria. And anyway, you see, he built Nineveh and Kala. We never have found Rehoboth, but but we do know Nineveh and Kala has been greatly excavated.
All right. Now, again, places like this, American Army knows where they are perfectly because they fought over there. We tend not to. And let me just say a word about this. One of the things that's easy to become discouraged about in trying to study Old Testament history is trying to get all these nations right. I mean, I don't know if y'all ever get frustrated by that. You know, I know when I first got started in studying Old Testament, you know, trying to figure out the difference between Babylon, Assyria, Syria. I mean, sometimes the Syrians are Israel's enemies. Sometimes the Assyrians, two totally different people. And yet oftentimes we don't realize that. The Syrians, oldest fully occupied city, as far as I know, still alive today, still exists today, is Damascus. And Damascus was the capital of Syria. And Damascus, by the way, I've never been there. Rodney, have you been to Damascus?
20 miles from Damascus, it's the closest I've been. The United Nations buildings, when you're at the Golan Heights, that's the division between Syria, so-called Syria.
Right.
And Syria came, from the Hellenistic and Roman period. It was called Aram in the ancient world. It was Damascus Aram.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the word Aramaic, Aramean, and all that kind of stuff. And the English translations were afraid people wouldn't understand who Israel was fighting, so they used the name that appeared in Hellenistic and Roman and came down to today.
Yeah.
So they wanted people to know when they fought the Syrians where they were. But most translations now are going to Arameans.
Yeah, just realize this is a complicated subject matter because of the changing of the various nations. But if you're going to understand the Old Testament, you got to know about Egypt, you got to know about Babylon, you got to know about Assyria, you got to know about Syria, then you got to know about the Canaanite tribes, such as, you know, the Philistines and others, the Jebusites. I mean, you read all that stuff and you want to pull your hair out. By the way, let me explain. Well, I noticed you've been reading about that.
I did.
Okay,
You know,
all right.
it's just there's very, you know, I've read an awful lot recently. So.
Let me just explain what this is like. Y'all remember in high school learning all 50 states and capitals? Y'all remember that? Some of y'all are going, no, because I never did. Hugh, did you learn all of them? No. I had all of them down at one time. And then on top of that, I had to learn all the counties of Mississippi. And you try to, by the way, you know how you get a county in Mississippi. You just find an Indian name you can't pronounce and you go with it. You know, everybody asks me, what county are you from? Well, if you live in Ripley, Mississippi, you tell everybody you're from Tipper County. And people literally will spell it T-I-P-P-E-R. Actually, it's Tippah County, T-I-P-P-A-H. It's an Indian name. I was baptized in, and I know some people, Iuka, Mississippi. Iuka is an Indian name. It's in Tishomingo County. That's an Indian name. So to learn all this stuff, you're like, man alive. Same is true for biblical people. You're going to learn all of these nations in the Old Testament. Rodney spent a lifetime doing it. That's why he is so good at explaining it. I've studied it, but Rodney, thank you, because I didn't know how the name Syria or Assyria, I didn't know how that came down, or Egypt. I didn't know that, the etymology of those words. And so, Rodney, thank you.
Yeah. It used to not bother me, you know, trying to pronounce all these names, because 99% of the time, if I was in a class or whatever, nobody else knew how to pronounce them, so you could just pronounce them whatever you wanted. But no, Dr. Cloud's sitting in here. I got to try to figure it out. So.
That's why I've been letting you read most
I
of it.
know.
All right, you're back up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Egypt was the father of the Ludites, the Anamites, the Leobites, the Naphtuhites, the Pathrosites, the Casluhites, from whom the Philistines came. I got that one. And the Caphtorites.
And if y'all are going, you got to be kidding me, we're going the same way.
Yeah.
Okay? Again, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever been around someone who's, for instance, a World War II veteran who's very familiar with the battle in Europe. They can describe the battles in great detail, what countries they were in, when they were there. For those of us who didn't experience, it's just like, whew, this is, almost too much information.
Oh, yeah. Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and of all these other people. The Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites.
And by the way, I'm of the tribe of the Campbellites.
The Campbellites.
Yeah, the Campbellites. That's what was a pejorative term used about churches of Christ. Some of y'all have never heard the term. Growing up in Mississippi, I have. But notice the father of Sidon, major city on the Lebanon coast. The Jebusites, anybody remember the city the Jebusites owned?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. During the reign of David, they finally captured the Jebusite city of Jerusalem. And of course, that's where David made his capital. And so a lot of these names stand out if you're familiar. The Hittites, of course, y'all remember. And by the way, you mentioned a while ago, about a lack of knowledge. BBC, this last week, I was listening to the BBC, and they were talking about biblical archaeology, Rodney. And they said 150 years ago, no one believed that the Hittites existed. And now we know more about the Hittites, a lost nation, a lost empire. And yet, which was, by the way, based, if I understand correctly, in modern-day Turkey. And so, comments?
Yeah, the amazing thing is we have 500 million Akkadian tablets. Of course, you saw the name Akkad a few minutes ago. We've never found the city of Akkad yet, but we know it was there because we have so many tablets from there, and the language came out of there and divided into Assyrian and Babylonian. But the Hittites, I actually had a course in the Hittite language, and they in the Empire period, which is biblical, but has a lot of contact with the Bible. They actually borrowed the Akkadian script, but it was an Indo-European language. It's like we use Latin for many different languages. They did, but yeah, we have excavated their capital city, and we have many, many records. And as I was telling, I think I said to Lee last week, the problem is Akkadian. I was at Lipscomb the other night at the archaeological meeting. Bill Deaver came and spoke on Solomon, etc. And the problem is they're now stopping in many universities to study archaeology. Why? Because they don't care about the Bible anymore.
Yeah.
And if you care about the Bible, you care about archaeology. And so Bill Deaver, who himself falls in kind of the not extreme liberal, but moderate to liberal category, is now going to conservative schools like Lipscomb on Friday and Saturday, talking about you guys are going to have to save this site. And a lot of schools no longer are teaching Akkadian. We teach Akkadian at Amherst, but only a handful of schools teach Akkadian now. They've dropped the study because they don't care about this area anymore.
And that's the good news. Next quarter, here in the auditorium, he's going to teach us Akkadian. Now, joking. All right. But yeah, that's the challenge. As you say, Rodney, as more and more people kind of move away. You go on, and you got the later Canaanite tribes scattered, and the borders of Canaan reach from Sidon toward Gerar, as far as Gaza, and then toward Sodom. Gaza should be familiar. If you know anything about modern-day Israel, the Gaza Strip is a piece of land in the very south. Israel controlled it for many years. Now the Palestinians control it. Constant warfare, rockets being shot out of Gaza toward Israel. Israel retaliates. Same Gaza there. Then toward Sodom and Gomorrah, over toward the Dead Sea, Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by their clans and languages in their territories. And so the Canaanite tribes, they're going to become the primary enemies of the ancient Israelites, of ancient Israel. And that's why these are so important. I mean, you get over into 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, you're seeing these names pop up all the time. You go, who are these people? Genesis kind of sets us up. And then finally, the sons of Shem.
Yeah. His older brother, sons were also born to Shem. His older brother was Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the sons of Eber.
And you get basically in the Arabian desert, as well as then, of course, Shem will become the ultimate great-great-great-great-grandfather of Abraham. And that's where the line will come from. Elam, Ashur,
Arphaxad.
Lud, and get Lud, and Aram. And then, of course, you get the sons of Aram here. And notice verse 24, say it again.
Arphaxad.
Arphaxad. I've never met anybody named Arphaxad.
No.
Yeah, and he's going to, of course, go through the line that Abraham will follow through.
Les, could I interrupt one thing?
Yes.
Could you go back
Yes, sir.
to, I think, verse 21, I believe it is, 20 or 21. One more, slide back.
There we go.
Notice it says, all of a sudden, Eber's name comes in. Well, he's going to be down the line later.
Yes.
And my theory, my view, is that's the name Hebrew. You see, that the word for Hebrew is Ivrit, which is a form of Eber. And it means the Hebrew language is called Ivrit. And so the H came on later, many years later. And so just all of a sudden he says, Shem, the ancestor of all the sons of Eber.
Right.
And then you go down in several verses, and suddenly Eber doesn't come in till you get down the line. But this is significant because this is Shem was the ancestor of the Hebrews also, is what it's saying.
Yes.
But they came specifically out of the line of Eber. A lot of people want to teach that the name Hebrew came from other places, but that's dying out. Almost everybody now believes it came from Eber, the
And
Eberites.
notice Eber, E-B-E-R, Hebrew, H-E-B, okay? So Hebrew, Eber, kind of the same kind of etymology going there. And by the way, anytime we speak in English, realize that we use letters that the ancient Hebrews and Greeks did not use. The biggest letter we use all the time that they did not use is the J. I mean, we call it Jesus. Jesus never heard a J on his name.
No. Wow.
Jesus, probably in his community, was Yaakov. Yeshua. Got Jacob to say it. Yeshua. A yeh sound, a Y. Jerusalem is not Jerusalem, Rodney pronounced?
Yeah, the name is Yerushalayim. It's a Y.
Yeah.
And the most shocking thing is to people is there's no I's in the original 1611 King James, no J's, because J became the constant for I years later.
Yeah.
And the original King James and many editions after, you had Jesus was I-E-S-U-S.
Yeah.
And all those I's, but when you came to the 1769 edition of the King James, they converted to the J's. So that's where the J's came in.
So if you want to go back to the original King James, knock yourself out. You will not be able to read it.
That's right.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, I like the King James and I want to go back to the King James. Nobody wants to go back to the 1611 King James. Take my word. It's like going back trying to read Shakespeare. If you you may have enjoyed Shakespeare in high school. I wasn't a big fan. I mean, I enjoy Shakespeare's plays, but not a big fan of that ancient English. All right, and so these are the sons of Shem as we come down the line. And two sons were born to Eber. One was named Peleg, because in his time the earth was divided. His brother was named Joktan.
Yeah.
I want to hear this.
Yeah, the earth was divided. I'm just going to throw out a couple of ideas that people have put forward. I don't know how many people have looked at in the past, if you look at geography and you see the lands and everything, and there's a theory, that goes out, there's like all the land was all together.
All the continents one time
You know,
were one continent.
time together, and then at some point, they started to separate. Some people would say this is what this is referring to, that this is when the earth became divided that way. Now, there's also, you know, the theory that it's almost a preview of
The next chapter.
Yeah, of Babel, you know, and the tower and what we'll get into with that. So those are the two main aspects that I've heard. I don't know if anybody's got any other ones. but-
Brother Rodney, what does it mean the earth was divided?
I'm not sure. I think it means he's trying to, what happens, these two sons are going to split into two different groups, but I couldn't give you a definitive answer on that.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those texts that just pops up, and you go, really? And of course, if it means that the continents were divided, then they were divided not nearly as long ago as what scientists wants to lead us to believe.
Right.
And which, you know, is one of the reasons for that. And then you have Joktan was the father, and I'm not going to read all these names. Y'all see these up here. The region where they lived stretched from Mesha towards Sephar in the eastern hill country. And so these are the sons of Shem by their clans and languages and their territories and nations. And the point simply is, what the writer of Genesis is doing is giving at least the people of that time an idea of where everybody lived. And by the way, have you ever left home and then gone back and talked with your mom and dad? I don't know if y'all have ever experienced that. I left Mississippi when I was 18. I've lived in Tennessee far longer than I ever lived in Mississippi. But I would go back home, and especially with my mom, not so much my dad, but mom would say, let's drive around. And then mom would start telling me where everybody lived. By the way, this is where your aunt lived right over here. This is where your uncle lived right over here. Remember so-and-so? No, Mom, I don't remember them. Well, they lived right over here. Mom's telling me, you know, my mom was notorious about doing that. Well, you remember so-and-so, don't you? I mean, that's your dad's second cousin once removed? No, Mother, I don't remember them. Well, they lived right here. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. In many ways, that's what the Bible's doing. The Bible is sitting there saying to Israelites who understood that world, here's where the different people came from. Us looking back is like being born in Mississippi and then going back 40 years later and trying to be told where everybody lived. I can't do that. I suspect you probably can't tell everybody where everybody lived over in Antioch where you were raised.
No.
I mean,
And particularly as things change so much, then you're trying to figure out, okay, now where was that again? You know, because and I know particularly when I lived in Scotland, and we'd come back and we'd visit, maybe every 2 to 3 years we'd come back, and I'd come back, it's like, what happened? Because so many things had changed, so much had gone on. I mean, goodness, now with Nashville, I've often made the statement that Nashville's official bird should be the crane because they're everywhere.
Yeah. Y'all know what he means by crane. Okay, never mind. Yeah, people are like, look at all the cranes downtown. All right, just to get you a sense, these people understood this. We have a hard time relating. People like Rodney who have studied it extensively, they get it. Just like someone, for instance, in Middle Tennessee who have studied Tennessee history. They can take you to all the major places in Nashville and tell you the history behind it. For those of us who moved into here, none of that makes sense to us. And by the way, I still have a problem pronouncing the street Demumbrium.
Close enough.
Boy, that one gives me fits. I'm like, man alive, what a street to name. And so these are the clans of Noah's son according to their lines of descent within their nations. From these, the nations spread out all of the earth after the flood. And then we move to chapter 11. And chapter 11, at least the first very short section of it, is a fascinating story. And it's a story about the confusion of the languages. But it's also a story about man's arrogance. It's a story that shows you that we were just as much after the flood like we were before the flood. So notice it very quickly. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. You would expect that with everybody descending from Noah. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar. Shinar, of course, is, again, modern-day Iraq, the Tigris-Euphrates River. And they settled there. Plenty of water, plenty of green grass, plenty of ability to farm. I mean, places to feed your herds, your flocks. And so, a wonderful place to settle. And they settle there. Ancient Babylon, as we're going to see. And then they said to each other, come, let's make bricks. Egypt, they didn't make bricks. They carved stone. You know, the pyramids are not made out of bricks. Why did they use bricks here and not stones like they did in Egypt? What do you think, Lee?
Well, that's such an easy question to answer. I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Cloud.
The reason that bricks are used so heavily in Mesopotamia is because they had the material to do it. Stones, of course, they had to really transport things a long way, and so it was just like. Whereas it's like in Egypt, why did they use papyrus? Because they had a lot of reeds along, and also because of the climate, whereas the papyri would rot in other places and all. But anyway, there was a tremendous shortage of stone.
Yes. And by the way, if you've never lived in West Tennessee, one of the things that always amazed me coming to Middle Tennessee is the rock. You see, you go to West Tennessee, I live just north of Memphis. Do you know how far you have to dig down to get to the rock? It is hundreds of feet. Topsoil. I came to Middle Tennessee and I saw signs, this is again 30 years ago, topsoil for sale. Are you kidding me? You can go to West Tennessee and get dump truckloads full of topsoil. Why? Because the topsoil is so deep in West Tennessee. And by the way, that's why there's far more farming in West Tennessee than in Middle Tennessee. And by the way, all you got to do is dig down in my backyard. You dig down 2 feet, you hit bedrock. 2 feet, you hit bedrock. And in West Tennessee, you could dig down forever and not hit bedrock. And so notice, come let's make brick, bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone because the Israelites understood stone coming out of Egypt. Tar for mortar. You go to Egypt and you're mixing, mud with straw. They used tar because they had a lot of tar. But then notice verse 4. Come let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. And what you get in Genesis 11 is a reversal of Genesis 6. At least that's my opinion on it. Others would disagree with me. And then notice, so that we may make a name for ourselves, otherwise we'll be scattered over the whole face of the earth. They came out of the ark and God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. We don't want to fill the earth. We don't want to be scattered over the earth. We want to make a name for ourselves, arrogance. We want to stay in one place. We don't want to be scattered. And then we want to reach up all the way to the heavens. Just as the sons of God came down, and again, people differ on this. This is Les Chapman's interpretation, okay? May be wrong, I admit that. But just as the Son of God came down and married the daughters of men, now the descendants of Noah want to ascend up to heaven and make a name for themselves. And so, to me, there's these two corresponding stories, both of which are wrong. Now, again, depending on how you translate or interpret the sons of God, may take you in a different direction. But at least that's the way I would look at that. And then you get that beautiful language, but the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building.
Yeah, he wasn't happy. And again, you've already touched on some of the reasons why. I mean, people are wanting to do the exact opposite of what God commanded them to do. And again, their thought process was still the same. Their mind was still set toward a lot of evil.
Yeah.
and like I say, arrogance and such. And, sometimes we may even stop and think, well, why wouldn't, we want, we look and we see, what man is able to accomplish with so many scientific
Yeah.
progress and things. We think, why wouldn't we want that to be together? Well, stop and think about what man has done in the name of progress, and in actual fact, so much of that is the exact opposite of what God would have happen.
And that language of God coming down, realize that's anthropomorphic language. God doesn't have to come down. God is here. The difference between us and God, which is why in the New Testament, the language of Jesus is not language of Jesus coming down as much as language of Jesus appearing. And so basically the fabric of creation being ripped apart and the presence of God is there. But this is very similar language. You go to Genesis 18, God comes down with two angels and says, I'm going to go down and see if the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah or the outcry against them is as great as I hear. Anthropomorphic language. Obviously he knew what it was. It's not that God has to come down and see it to understand it. This is language very similar to my dad. Best illustration I can give you. When me and my brother would act up and wouldn't go to sleep at night, my dad would simply say this, boys, do I need to come in there? Now, I understood what that meant because that didn't mean Daddy wanted to come in there. Y'all know what it means when Daddy says, do I need to come in there? That meant you were going to get a tanning, okay? And I've oftentimes said to my boys, when I say, do you want me to come in there, you better not say yes. Because if you do, I never once said, oh yeah, Dad, come ahead, bring your belt with you. Okay? That is language you understand. This is language that they obviously understood. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. It does say something, Lee, to how evil we can become.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the propensity of really doing amazing things, created in the image of God, but like you said, not the godliness that God calls us to.
Yeah. And really, and I know our time's about up, but to me, a part of that, this kind of falls into a lot of what you were saying this morning, in your message was, we have to be in the world but not of the world. And this was a case of being of the world.
Of the world.
And
yeah.
God was taking steps to have his will done. And like I say, we'll move on to that from there.
Yeah,
So.
we'll pick up with that. Thank you for being here. Let's bow. Father, thank you so much for being our God. Thank you for this wonderful book of Genesis. And Father, we can read these names and we can throw up our hands and just be frustrated by not understanding how even to pronounce them. And yet these names were significant names, just like our names are significant to someone. And Father, to the first readers, made all the sense in the world. Help us to realize that. And help us, Father, to be students of the Word. Thank you for those who have been students in such marvelous ways as Brother Rodney can explain so much of this. And Father, just pray that as we continue in this study, especially as we move into the wonderful story of a man named Abraham, that Father, you will help us to see exactly this incredible plan that you created, that we're a part of now, and that one day will bring all things back under your authority. We ask all this in Jesus' name.